It was the autumn of 1925 in a small, peaceful American village called Willow Creek. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the rolling hills, its golden light covered the countryside like a warm blanket. A cool breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and fresh hay through the quiet air. Birds were returning to their nests, singing their final songs before nightfall. The calm river flowing beside the village reflected the beautiful shades of orange, pink, and purple painted across the evening sky. Along the dusty country roads, cozy wooden houses began to glow with warm light as families settled in for the night. At the edge of the village stood an old wooden bridge that had watched over Willow Creek for generations. Every evening, without fail, an elderly man named Mr. Elias walked slowly toward the bridge, carrying a polished brass lantern in his hands. Reaching the wooden post beside the bridge, he carefully hung the lantern and lit its gentle flame. As the first stars appeared above the quiet countryside, the warm golden light spread across the bridge, silently guiding anyone still traveling home through the peaceful autumn night. Tommy, a curious 10-year-old boy, had watched the old man light the lantern every evening for as long as he could remember. No matter the weather, whether gentle rain fell from the sky, cold winds swept through the village, or snow covered the wooden bridge, Mr. Elias never missed a single night. The lantern always shone before darkness settled over Willow Creek. This evening, Tommy quietly followed him from a distance. Hiding behind a large oak tree, he watched as the warm golden light flickered gently against the cool autumn breeze. The peaceful river flowed beneath the bridge, carrying the lantern's reflection across the calm water. Gathering his courage, Tommy slowly stepped forward. Removing his cap politely, he looked up at the old man with wide, curious eyes. "Excuse me, Mr. Elias," he asked softly. "Why do you light this lantern every single evening?" Mr. Elias smiled kindly but did not answer right away. He gazed at the glowing lantern for a long, thoughtful moment, as if it held memories from another lifetime. Then he looked toward the distant hills where the last colors of sunset had faded into the deep blue evening sky. "My boy," he said gently, "this little lantern once saved my life, many years ago." Tommy's eyes widened with amazement as he stepped closer to Mr. Elias. The village had grown quiet. Only the gentle sound of the river and the distant song of crickets filled the cool autumn night. The warm glow of the lantern softly illuminated their faces, creating a peaceful circle of light beneath the starry sky. Mr. Elias took a slow breath before he began to speak. "When I was even younger than you," he said gently, "I once went into the forest with my father to gather firewood. We worked until evening, but as the sun disappeared behind the hills, I wandered too far from the path. Before I realized it, I was completely alone." He paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on the lantern's gentle flame as though the memory had never faded. "Thick fog covered the countryside," he continued softly. "Every road looked the same, and darkness surrounded me. I called for my father, but there was no answer. I was frightened, cold, and didn't know which way to go." Then a gentle smile appeared on his face. "Just when I thought I would never find my way home, I saw a tiny golden light shining through the fog. It was a lantern, and that little light showed me the road that led safely back to my family." Tommy listened without saying a word, realizing that even the smallest light can change someone's life forever. The gentle flame of the lantern flickered in the cool evening breeze as Mr. Elias continued his story. Tommy remained silent, listening carefully to every word. "I followed that little light with all the hope I had left," Mr. Elias said softly. "Every step brought me farther away from the darkness and closer to safety. The fog slowly began to clear, and soon I found myself standing on a familiar country road. In the distance, he could see the warm glow of his family's farmhouse windows. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney, and a faint light shone through the curtains. At that very moment, the front door swung open. My mother ran toward me with tears in her eyes," Mr. Elias whispered with a smile. "She hugged me so tightly that I could hardly breathe. My father placed his hand on my shoulder and thanked God that I had found my way home." Mr. Elias looked once more at the glowing lantern beside the bridge. "I never discovered who had lit that lantern," he said. but I made a promise to myself that one day I would become the person who leaves a light behind for others. Tommy looked at the lantern with new understanding. It was no longer just a lamp beside an old bridge. It was a quiet symbol of hope, kindness, and the promise that even a small light could guide someone safely through the darkest night. Years passed peacefully in Willow Creek. Spring filled the fields with colorful wildflowers, summer brought warm sunshine, autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, and winter covered the village with a blanket of snow. Through every season, one thing never changed. Every evening, just before sunset, Mr. Elias walked to the old wooden bridge with his brass lantern. No matter how heavy the rain, how fierce the wind, or how deep the snow, the lantern was always lit before darkness fell. The villagers came to expect its warm golden glow. Travelers crossing the bridge smiled with relief when they saw the light shining in the distance. Parents often told their children, "As long as Mr. Elias's lantern is burning, no one is ever truly lost." Tommy grew older, but he never forgot the story he had heard that quiet autumn evening. Whenever he saw the lantern glowing beside the bridge, he remembered the promise Mr. Elias had made many years before to become the person who leaves a light for others. One evening, as the two stood watching the sunset together, Tommy quietly asked, "Mr. Elias, do you think someone will light the lantern after you?" Mr. Elias smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the warm golden flame. "I believe," he said softly, "that kindness always finds another heart to carry it forward." A few more years slipped by, and Mr. Elias grew older with each passing season. His hair turned as white as winter snow, and his steps became slower than ever before. Yet every evening he still carried the brass lantern to the old wooden bridge, smiling quietly as its warm light welcomed travelers home. One chilly autumn afternoon, Mr. Elias tried to lift the lantern, but his hands trembled with age. He looked toward the bridge and sighed softly. For the first time in many years, he wondered if he would be able to keep his promise. Watching from a distance, Tommy understood without a single word being spoken. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, Tommy picked up the brass lantern with gentle hands. He walked across the familiar path to the old wooden bridge, just as Mr. Elias had done for so many years. Without hesitation, Tommy carefully hung the lantern on its wooden post and struck a match. The tiny flame came to life, filling the bridge with its warm golden glow. Standing a few steps away, Mr. Elias smiled with tears shining in his eyes. He knew the lantern had found its next keeper. In that quiet moment, nothing needed to be said. The light itself told the story, a story of kindness passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that no traveler would ever face the darkness alone. The next evening, just before sunset, Tommy arrived at the old wooden bridge carrying the brass lantern. The cool autumn breeze whispered through the trees as golden leaves drifted gently onto the quiet path. For a brief moment, he stood silently, holding the lantern exactly as Mr. Elias had done for so many years. With steady hands, Tommy lit the flame. The warm golden light spread across the bridge, reflecting beautifully on the calm river below. It felt as though the lantern itself welcomed its new keeper. From the porch of his little wooden house, Mr. Elias watched the glowing light in the distance. A peaceful smile crossed his face as he leaned back in his rocking chair. He knew his promise had not ended. It had simply found a new beginning. That night, a weary traveler crossed the bridge after a long journey. Seeing the lantern shining through the darkness, the traveler paused for a moment and smiled with relief. "Someone is looking out for us," the traveler whispered before continuing safely toward the village. Tommy watched the traveler disappear down the quiet country road and finally understood what Mr. Elias had meant all those years ago. The lantern had never been about the light alone. It was a symbol of hope, compassion, and the simple kindness of helping strangers find their way home. Above the peaceful village of Willow Creek, the stars filled the night sky while the little lantern continued to glow, just as it always had and just as it always would. Many decades passed, and Willow Creek slowly changed with time. New families arrived, children grew into adults, and the old dirt roads became smoother. Yet the little wooden bridge remained, standing quietly beside the gentle river, just as it had for generations. Every evening before the sun disappeared beyond the hills, Tommy, now an old man with silver hair and kind eyes, walked to the bridge carrying the same polished brass lantern. Just as Mr. Elias had once done, he carefully lit the flame and watched its warm golden glow spread across the quiet countryside. One autumn evening, a young girl named Emma stopped beside the bridge. She looked at the lantern with curious eyes and asked softly, "Sir, why do you light this lantern every single night?" Tommy smiled gently. He looked at the glowing flame and then up at the star-filled sky. "Because," he replied, "many years ago someone left a light for a frightened little boy. That boy grew up and passed the light to me. One day I hope someone will carry it after I am gone." Emma gazed at the lantern in silence. The warm light reflected in her eyes, and a quiet smile appeared on her face. In that peaceful moment, the flame continued to burn, not only inside the lantern but also in another young heart, ready to keep the light alive for generations yet to come. The years continued to pass, but the tradition of the lantern never faded. Every evening as the sun slipped below the horizon, the warm golden light appeared beside the old wooden bridge, just as it had for nearly a century. Travelers smiled when they saw it, children waved as they crossed the bridge, and the people of Willow Creek felt a quiet sense of comfort knowing the lantern was always there. Emma visited the bridge often after that day. She loved listening to Tommy's stories about Mr. Elias and the mysterious stranger whose single act of kindness had changed so many lives. With every story, she realized that the lantern was more than a simple light. It was a promise to care for people, even those you had never met. One crisp autumn evening, Tommy placed the brass lantern into Emma's hands. It felt surprisingly heavy, polished smooth by generations of careful hands. "This lantern doesn't belong to me," Tommy said with a gentle smile. "It belongs to everyone who believes that kindness can light the darkest path." Emma nodded quietly. As the first stars appeared above Willow Creek, she carefully lit the lantern for the very first time. Its warm golden glow spread across the old bridge, shining as brightly as it had 100 years before. From that moment on, the light continued its journey, carrying hope from one generation to the next, proving that even the smallest act of kindness can become a tradition that lasts forever. As another peaceful autumn evening settled over Willow Creek, Emma walked slowly toward the old wooden bridge with the brass lantern resting carefully in her hands. The familiar path felt different now, not because the village had changed, but because she carried a responsibility that had been passed down through generations. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and lavender as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant hills. A cool breeze stirred the golden leaves, and the gentle sound of the river echoed through the quiet valley. Emma carefully hung the lantern on the old wooden post and lit the tiny flame. Within seconds, its warm golden light spread across the bridge, shining just as it had for more than 100 years. At that very moment, a young family traveling home crossed the bridge. Their little daughter paused, looking at the glowing lantern with a smile. "Mom," she whispered, "this light makes me feel safe." Emma heard the little girl's words and smiled softly. She finally understood that the lantern had always been more than a source of light. It carried comfort to the weary, hope to the lost, and kindness to everyone who passed by. As darkness gently covered Willow Creek, the lantern continued to glow beneath the countless stars, reminding every traveler that no matter how long the journey, there would always be a light waiting to guide them home. The seasons came and went, and the lantern continued to shine every evening without fail. Children who had once crossed the old wooden bridge holding their parents' hands were now bringing their own families to Willow Creek. To everyone in the village, the glowing lantern had become more than a tradition. It had become a symbol of home. One cold winter evening, heavy snow covered the countryside. Strong winds swept across the bridge, and the roads were almost impossible to see. Emma wrapped herself in a thick wool coat, picked up the brass lantern, and slowly made her way through the snow. When she reached the bridge, she carefully lit the lantern. Its warm golden light pierced the swirling snowflakes, creating a small circle of hope in the freezing darkness. A few moments later, an elderly traveler appeared through the snow. He had been searching for the road to the village for hours. As soon as he saw the lantern, relief filled his tired face. "I thought I was lost," he said with a grateful smile, "but your light showed me the way." Emma smiled warmly, remembering the stories of Mr. Elias and Tommy. At that moment, she realized the lantern was still doing exactly what it had always done, helping strangers find their way home. As the snow continued to fall beneath the quiet winter sky, the little brass lantern burned brightly, proving once again that even in the coldest and darkest night, a single light could fill the world with hope. Years later, the people of Willow Creek no longer remembered the name of the stranger who had first hung a lantern beside the old bridge. Time had carried away many stories, but it could never erase the kindness that had lived on through generations. Every evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the familiar golden light appeared once again. Travelers smiled when they saw it. Children felt safe walking across the bridge, and the quiet village welcomed another peaceful night. Emma often stood beside the lantern for a few moments before returning home. She would look up at the stars and quietly whisper, "Thank you," to the unknown soul whose simple act of kindness had changed so many lives. One calm autumn night, a gentle breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves through the village. The lantern glowed softly, reflecting across the still river like a tiny golden star upon the water. Above, thousands of real stars filled the night sky, shining silently over Willow Creek. And so the lantern continued to burn, not because someone was told to keep it lit, but because kindness had become part of the village itself. As the world grew quiet and every home turned off its lights for the night, one little lantern remained glowing beside the old wooden bridge, patiently waiting to guide the next traveler safely home. The end. Epilogue: The Light That Never Fades. Many years later, visitors from distant towns often asked about the old brass lantern beside the wooden bridge. Some believed it was simply an old village tradition. Others thought it was a forgotten piece of history. The elders of Willow Creek would simply smile and say, "That lantern has guided hearts for longer than anyone can remember." As the years passed, Emma grew older, just as Tommy and Mr. Elias had before her. Yet every evening the lantern still shone with the same warm golden light, welcoming every traveler who crossed the bridge. One quiet autumn evening, a young boy paused beside Emma and asked with innocent curiosity, "Will this lantern always stay here?" Emma smiled gently and placed a hand on the lantern. "As long as there is someone willing to help another person," she whispered, "this light will never fade." The boy looked at the glowing flame with wonder. Deep inside his heart, a small spark of kindness began to grow. Above them, the stars sparkled across the endless night sky, while the little lantern continued to glow beside the old wooden bridge, its light carrying hope from one generation to the next, reminding everyone that even the smallest act of kindness can shine forever. Chapter 2. A new journey begins. The following autumn, Willow Creek welcomed another peaceful season. The golden leaves once again covered the quiet country roads, and the old brass lantern continued to glow beside the wooden bridge every evening. One afternoon, a tired young traveler arrived in the village carrying nothing but a small leather backpack and an old journal. His name was Daniel, and he had spent months traveling across America, collecting forgotten stories from small towns. As he crossed the bridge, the warm light of the lantern caught his attention. He stopped, closed his journal, and stared at the glowing flame. "There must be a story behind this lantern," he whispered to himself. Emma, now the village's lantern keeper, noticed the young traveler standing quietly by the bridge. With a gentle smile, she walked toward him. "You seem curious," she said warmly. Daniel nodded. "I've visited many towns," he replied, "but I've never seen a lantern that people care for every single night. I'd love to know why." Emma looked at the golden flame dancing softly in the evening breeze. She smiled, knowing that another heart was about to discover the story that had inspired generations. "Come," she said kindly. "Let me tell you a story that began long before either of us was born." As the first stars appeared above Willow Creek, Daniel sat quietly beside the bridge, opened his journal, and prepared to write down a story that would never be forgotten. The evening grew quieter as Daniel opened his worn leather journal. The pages were filled with handwritten stories from forgotten villages, lonely farms, and old railroad towns across America. Yet somehow Willow Creek already felt different from every place he had ever visited. Emma sat on a wooden bench beside the bridge, watching the lantern's golden light dance gently in the cool autumn breeze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The peaceful sound of the river and the distant call of an owl filled the silence. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I've traveled thousands of miles," he said softly, "searching for stories that people have forgotten. But this village, it feels as if kindness itself lives here." Emma smiled. "Kindness never disappears," she replied. "It simply waits for someone willing to carry it forward." Daniel looked once more at the glowing lantern. He carefully picked up his pen and began writing. "In a quiet village called Willow Creek, I found a light that had been shining for generations, not because it had to, but because one act of kindness inspired another." As he finished the sentence, a gentle breeze swept across the bridge, causing the lantern's flame to flicker softly without ever going out. Daniel closed his journal with a peaceful smile. Deep in his heart, he knew this would become the most important story he had ever written, a story that would remind people everywhere that even the smallest light can guide someone through life's darkest moments. That afternoon, Daniel followed a narrow country path that led beyond the old wooden bridge. The golden autumn leaves crunched softly beneath his boots, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine trees and fresh earth. The peaceful countryside stretched endlessly before him, filled with rolling hills, quiet farms, and small wooden cottages. As he walked, he noticed an elderly woman sitting on the porch of a weathered farmhouse, gently knitting a warm wool blanket. She smiled as Daniel approached. "You must be the young traveler," she said kindly. "I heard you've come to learn about our lantern." Daniel nodded politely. "Yes," he replied. "Everyone I meet tells me a different part of its story." The woman looked toward the distant bridge, where the tiny brass lantern could still be seen hanging from its wooden post. "My grandfather once told me," she said softly, "that a single act of kindness can travel farther than any road. Long after we're gone, the kindness we leave behind continues its journey through others." Daniel carefully wrote her words into his journal. He realized that every person in Willow Creek carried a piece of the lantern's story in their heart. As the afternoon sun slowly drifted toward the horizon, Daniel closed his notebook and looked back at the bridge. The lantern had become more than a symbol. It had become the soul of Willow Creek, quietly reminding everyone that the brightest light is the kindness we share with others. As evening approached once again, Daniel returned to the old wooden bridge. The sky was painted with soft shades of gold, orange, and violet, while the gentle river reflected the fading sunlight like a sheet of glass. Emma was already there, carefully cleaning the old brass lantern with a soft cloth. She smiled as Daniel walked closer. "I've been thinking about everything I've learned here," Daniel said quietly. "This lantern has done more than guide travelers. It has changed the hearts of everyone in this village." Emma nodded with a peaceful smile. "That's because kindness is like a flame," she replied. "When you use it to light another lantern, your own light never grows weaker." Daniel stood silently, watching as Emma lit the lantern just as the first star appeared in the evening sky. The warm golden glow spread across the bridge, filling the quiet countryside with a sense of comfort and hope. At that moment, a young father and his little son crossed the bridge. The boy stopped and looked at the glowing lantern with wonder. "Dad," he asked softly, "who lights this beautiful lantern every night?" His father smiled. "Someone who believes that no one should ever have to walk through the darkness alone." Daniel quickly wrote those words into his journal. As he closed the book, he realized that the story of the lantern was no longer just the history of Willow Creek. It had become a timeless lesson, a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can travel through generations, touching hearts long after the hands that first lit the flame are gone. Chapter 2. Scene 6. That night, after the village had fallen asleep, Daniel sat alone on a wooden bench beside the old bridge. The lantern glowed quietly beside him, its warm light reflecting across the calm river. Above, countless stars filled the sky, and the cool autumn breeze carried the gentle scent of pine and fallen leaves. Daniel opened his journal one more time. Instead of writing about the lantern, he began writing about the people of Willow Creek. "A village is not remembered because of its buildings," he wrote. "It is remembered because of the kindness its people leave behind." As he finished the sentence, he heard slow footsteps approaching. It was Emma carrying 2 steaming cups of hot tea. "I thought you might still be here," she said with a gentle smile. Daniel accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you," he replied. "I've traveled across America searching for remarkable places, but I think I finally understand what makes a place truly special." Emma looked toward the glowing lantern. "It's never the lantern itself," she said softly. "It's the hearts of the people who choose to keep the light alive." For a few peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the lantern burn against the quiet night. Daniel closed his journal and smiled. "I came here looking for a story," he whispered. "Instead, I found a lesson that will stay with me for the rest of my life." The lantern continued to shine beneath the endless stars, quietly reminding anyone who passed that hope, kindness, and compassion never fade. They simply find new hearts to carry their light forward. Chapter 2, Scene 7. The following morning, Daniel packed his small leather backpack and stood outside the little inn. The village was just beginning to wake. Soft sunlight filtered through the autumn trees, and a gentle mist floated above the quiet river. Before leaving Willow Creek, there was one place he knew he had to visit one last time. He walked slowly to the old wooden bridge. Emma was already there, polishing the brass lantern as she did every morning. She looked up and smiled. "So your journey continues?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes," he replied, "but I won't leave empty-handed." Emma looked at his backpack and laughed softly. "You didn't buy any souvenirs?" Daniel placed a hand over his journal. "I found something far more valuable than a souvenir," he said. "I found a story that reminds people to be kind." Emma gently closed the lantern's glass door. "Then promise me one thing," she said. Daniel looked at her with curiosity. "When you reach another town, don't just tell them about this lantern. Encourage them to become a light for someone else." Daniel smiled warmly. "I promise." They shook hands, and Daniel began walking down the quiet country road. After a few steps, he turned around one last time. The old wooden bridge stood peacefully beside the river, and the brass lantern sparkled in the morning sunlight, waiting patiently for another evening to fill the village with its warm golden light. As Daniel disappeared beyond the rolling hills, he knew that his journey was no longer about collecting stories. It was about sharing them and inspiring others to keep the light of kindness shining wherever life might lead them. Scene 8. Several weeks later, Daniel arrived in a quiet mountain town far from Willow Creek. Although the village looked different, something felt familiar. The narrow streets were peaceful, the people were kind, and every face carried a story waiting to be told. One rainy evening, Daniel noticed an elderly woman struggling to cross a muddy road with a basket full of groceries. Without hesitation, he hurried over, took the heavy basket, and carefully walked beside her until they reached her small wooden cottage. The woman smiled with grateful eyes. "You didn't have to help me," she said. Daniel returned her smile. "A wise friend once told me that kindness is like a lantern," he replied. "The more people you help, the brighter the world becomes." The woman thanked him warmly before closing her front door. As Daniel continued his journey, he realized something wonderful. He had not carried the brass lantern with him, yet its light was still traveling wherever he went. That evening, he opened his journal and wrote, "The true lantern was never made of brass or glass. It was made of compassion, hope, and the courage to help a stranger without expecting anything in return." He closed the journal and looked up at the star-filled sky. Somewhere, many miles away, the lantern of Willow Creek was glowing beside the old wooden bridge. Daniel smiled quietly. Even though he had left the village behind, its light would remain with him for the rest of his life, and through every story he shared, that light would continue to guide countless hearts, just as it had guided his own. Months passed, and Daniel's journal became filled with stories of ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of kindness. Everywhere he traveled, he discovered that hope often appeared in the smallest moments: a shared meal, a helping hand, a comforting smile, or a lantern glowing in someone's heart. One crisp autumn evening, Daniel found himself standing beside a quiet river in another small American town. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he noticed a young boy sitting alone on a wooden dock, staring silently at the water. Daniel walked over and sat beside him. "You seem deep in thought," he said gently. The boy nodded. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "My father says we're moving away tomorrow. I'll have to leave my friends and start over somewhere new." Daniel smiled kindly. He understood that feeling all too well. "When I was your age," he said, "I learned that home isn't only a place. Sometimes home is the kindness we carry with us wherever we go." The boy looked at him with curious eyes. Daniel reached into his backpack and carefully removed his old leather journal. He opened it to the very first page, the page where he had written about the lantern of Willow Creek. He handed the journal to the boy. "Read this someday," Daniel said softly. "Whenever life feels dark, remember that even the smallest light can lead you home." The boy accepted the journal with both hands, holding it as if it were a precious treasure. As the evening sky filled with stars, Daniel quietly continued his journey down the peaceful country road. Behind him, the young boy opened the journal and began reading the story of a small brass lantern whose light had traveled far beyond the old wooden bridge of Willow Creek. And in that quiet moment, Daniel realized the greatest stories are not meant to stay on paper. They are meant to live on in the hearts of those who hear them. Years passed, and the young boy never forgot the journal Daniel had given him. He carried it wherever he went, reading its pages whenever life felt uncertain. Each story reminded him that even the smallest act of kindness could brighten someone's darkest day. One cool autumn evening, now a grown man, he returned to Willow Creek. The village looked much the same as it had in Daniel's stories. The old wooden bridge still stood proudly over the quiet river, and as the sun slipped below the hills, the familiar brass lantern began to glow with its warm golden light. Emma, now older but still full of kindness, noticed the visitor standing quietly beside the bridge. "You seem to know this place," she said with a gentle smile. The man held up Daniel's worn leather journal. "I've never been here before," he replied softly, "but this story has been my companion for many years. It taught me that kindness can travel farther than any road." Emma's eyes filled with quiet joy. She looked at the lantern and then back at the traveler. "Then Daniel's journey truly fulfilled its purpose," she whispered. The traveler stepped onto the old wooden bridge and watched the lantern's reflection shimmer across the peaceful river. In that moment, he understood that the light had never belonged to one person, one family, or even one village. It belonged to everyone who chose hope instead of fear, compassion instead of indifference, and kindness instead of silence. As night settled gently over Willow Creek, the lantern continued to burn beneath the stars, its golden glow reaching far beyond the bridge, touching hearts, inspiring strangers, and quietly reminding the world that one small light can begin a legacy that lasts forever. The following morning, the traveler stood quietly on the old wooden bridge, watching the first rays of sunlight dance across the gentle river. A cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves through the village, and the brass lantern rested peacefully on its wooden post after another night of guiding travelers home. Emma walked toward him with a warm smile. "It seems the lantern has given you more than just a story," she said. The traveler nodded. "It changed the way I see the world," he replied. "Before reading Daniel's journal, I believed great things could only be done by great people. Now I know that even the smallest act of kindness can echo through generations." Emma looked at the quiet village surrounding them. "That is the true gift of the lantern," she said softly. "Its light fades with the sunrise, but the kindness it inspires never fades." The traveler reached into his bag and carefully placed Daniel's journal into Emma's hands. "I think it's time for this story to return home," he said. Emma accepted the journal with gratitude. She gently turned its worn pages, smiling as she recognized Daniel's handwriting. "This journal will stay here," she whispered, "so that every visitor who comes to Willow Creek will remember that kindness is the brightest light anyone can leave behind." The traveler took one last look at the glowing brass lantern before continuing his journey down the peaceful country road. As he disappeared beyond the golden hills, another chapter of the lantern story quietly came to an end. While its light continued to shine in the hearts of everyone it had touched, autumn returned to Willow Creek once again. The golden trees swayed gently in the cool breeze, and the old wooden bridge stood quietly beside the peaceful river, just as it had for more than a century. Inside the village library, Emma carefully placed Daniel's journal into a small wooden display case. Beside it rested an old photograph of Mr. Elias holding the brass lantern many years ago. A simple handwritten note beneath the journal read, "Every light begins with one act of kindness." People from nearby towns began visiting Willow Creek, not because it was famous, but because they had heard whispers of a village where kindness had become a tradition. Children gathered around Emma as she read the story aloud. They listened with wide eyes as she spoke of Mr. Elias, Tommy, Daniel, and the lantern that had inspired generations. When the story ended, a little girl quietly raised her hand. "Miss Emma," she asked, "do you think I can become a lantern keeper someday?" Emma smiled warmly and gently placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "You don't have to wait," she said softly. "Every time you help someone, comfort a friend, or show kindness to a stranger, you become a lantern keeper." The children looked at one another with bright smiles, as if each of them had discovered a tiny light inside their own hearts. Outside, the evening sun slowly disappeared behind the hills. As always, the brass lantern was lit beside the old wooden bridge, its warm golden glow shining across the calm river. And somewhere beyond Willow Creek, another traveler noticed that gentle light in the distance and smiled, knowing that no matter how long the road, there would always be hope waiting at the end of the journey.